The notification lit up her phone at the exact moment the pastor said, "Speak now or forever hold your peace." Chidera Johnson's breath caught. Through the delicate lace of her white gloves, she felt her phone vibrate against her thigh where it sat hidden in the folds of her custom Vera Wang gown. Her eyes remained locked on Williams, her groom, her soon-to-be husband, the man who'd finally made her feel like she was more than her bank account, more than the tech empress who'd built an empire but couldn't buy genuine affection. The silence stretched. No one objected. Of course they wouldn't. This was perfect. She was perfect. For once in her life, Chidera Johnson was enough. The phone buzzed again. She ignored it. Probably her assistant with some last-minute crisis at the company. Nothing mattered today except this moment, this man, this promise of finally being chosen for herself and not her billions. William squeezed her hand, and his smile reached his eyes, those beautiful, lying eyes. "If there are no objections," the pastor began. The cathedral doors exploded inward. The sound cracked through the sanctuary like a gunshot. 200 heads whipped toward the entrance as the heavy oak doors slammed against stone walls, the boom echoing through the vaulted ceiling like the voice of God himself rejecting this union. Chidera's heart stopped. A man walked through those doors like he owned them, like he owned the church, like he owned the very concept of interruption. He wore a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a weapon, and behind him, 6 men in identical black moved in formation. Their hands folded at their waists in a way that suggested they were hiding something far more dangerous than wedding gifts. But it was his face that made Chidera's blood run cold. Dark tattoos crawled up his neck like vines of violence, disappearing beneath his collar and reappearing on his hands. Intricate, deliberate markings that told a story written in blood and power. His expression held something between amusement and absolute certainty, like a predator who'd already calculated every possible escape route and found them all blocked. He didn't stop walking, didn't pause to acknowledge the gasps spreading through the pews like wildfire. His eyes, sharp, cold, merciless, locked onto Williams with the kind of focus that made prey animals freeze before the kill. "Pastor," the stranger said, or his voice carrying the faint lilt of a Korean accent wrapped around perfect, dangerous English. "You might want to pause the ceremony." Chidera felt Williams's hand go rigid in hers. She looked at her groom and saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Pure, animal fear, bleeding through his handsome features like ink through water. "Who—" the pastor sputtered. "Sir, this is a private ceremony." The stranger reached into his jacket. Every one of his men moved in unison, hands shifting to their waistbands. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a ledger. Black leather, worn at the edges, the kind of book that held secrets people killed to keep buried. "My name is Young Jin," he announced, his voice cutting through the shocked silence, "and I'm here to object." He opened the ledger. Chidera's phone buzzed again in her dress, and she felt it like a second heartbeat, insistent, urgent. Young Jin's eyes found hers. "Mrs. Johnson? Forgive me, Ms. Johnson, since this marriage hasn't happened yet and God willing, never will. I suggest you check your phone." Her mouth went dry. "I don't know what you think." "Check your phone." Not a request, a command. With trembling fingers, Chidera reached into the hidden pocket of her gown and pulled out her phone. The screen showed 3 messages from an unknown number, each one a hammer blow to the fairy tale she'd been living. Transaction confirmed, $500,000 deposited. Target Chidera Johnson. Method marriage fraud. Contractor Williams Hayes, alias Michael Bennett, Christopher Wade, James Morrison. Termination scheduled, 72 hours post-ceremony. The phone slipped from her gloved hands. Williams caught it reflexively, Or when she watched his face change as he read the screen, watched guilt, then panic, then something darker flash across his features. "Chidera, let me explain," he started. Young Jin laughed. The sound was wrong in the holy space, sharp and cruel and somehow satisfied. "Oh, I think I'll handle the explaining, William." He snapped his fingers. The cathedral erupted in chaos. Bills, $100 bills, began raining from the balcony, where Young Jin's men had apparently positioned themselves during the ceremony. Money fell like poisoned snow, fluttering down onto the white runner, onto the shocked faces of Chidera's family, onto the altar itself. $500,000, Young Jin announced, his voice rising above the gasps and whispers. "That's what the Dimitrov syndicate paid your beloved Groom to marry you. I drain your company's assets and arrange a very tragic accident during your honeymoon in Bali." Chidera couldn't breathe. The white lace of her gown suddenly felt like a shroud. The cathedral, her cathedral, where she'd imagined walking toward forever, tilted and spun. "You're lying," William said, but his voice cracked. "You're insane. Chidera, don't listen to this." "Page 47, Young Jin said calmly, flipping through the ledger. "The contract signed 3 months ago, right around the time he proposed, if I'm not mistaken." He held up the ledger, turned it to face the congregation. Chidera saw it even from 10 feet away. William's signature. Not the flowing script he'd used on their engagement announcement, but a signature nonetheless, binding him to her destruction. Her knees buckled. She would have fallen. But Williams grabbed her arm. The same hand that had held hers moments ago with false tenderness now gripped her with desperate strength. "Chidera, please." She looked up at him. Really looked. And for the first time since he'd walked into her life at that tech conference in Dubai, she saw him clearly, saw the calculation behind the charm, saw the greed behind the adoration, saw the grave he'd been digging for her since their very first conversation. "Let go of me," she whispered. "We can fix this. Let go of me." Her voice cracked like a whip through the cathedral. Williams released her, stumbling backward. The money was still falling, still littering the sacred space with evidence of his betrayal. Chidera's maid of honor, her best friend since college, stood frozen in the front pew, her face pale as death. Young Jin descended the steps toward them, his tattooed hands casually tucked into his pockets, utterly relaxed in the chaos he'd created. He stopped 3 feet from Chidera and tilted his head, studying her like she was a fascinating equation. "Miss Johnson," he said quietly, though somehow everyone heard him. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I couldn't let you sign your death warrant in white lace." "Who are you?" The words escaped as barely a whisper. His smile was a blade wrapped in silk. "I'm the man your company has been protecting without knowing it. Your encryption software. It's the only thing keeping my syndicate's communications secure from our enemies, and I protect my assets." The meaning crashed over her. She wasn't saved. She was claimed. "So this," she gestured weakly at the falling money, "Wyatt Williams' exposed treachery. This is business?" "Everything is business, Ms. Johnson, but some business is more personal than others." Young Jin's eyes flicked to Williams with open contempt. "The Dimitrov syndicate thought they could eliminate you, steal your technology, and I'd never know who was responsible. They were wrong." Williams bolted. He broke for the side door of the cathedral, his polished shoes slipping on scattered bills. Young Jin didn't even turn around. He simply raised 2 fingers and 2 of his men materialized from the shadows, blocking Williams' escape, like walls made of violence and expensive suits. "Sit down, William," Young Jin said, his voice bored. "We're not finished." Chidera's world narrowed to a single point of crystalline clarity. She'd built a tech empire from nothing. Survived boardrooms full of men who saw her as a diversity checkbox, coded her first encryption algorithm at 16 while her peers worried about prom. She'd conquered every obstacle through brilliance and determination, but she'd never felt this kind of fury before. Cold, surgical, absolute. Her hand found her phone again. Her thumb moved across the screen with muscle memory born from 1,000 crisis management sessions. 3 taps, a biometric scan, access to her company's entire digital infrastructure. "Chidera, what are you doing?" William's voice came out strangled as Young Jin's men forced him back toward the altar. She looked up at him, and her voice came out steady as stone. "What I should have done the moment you asked me out. Due diligence." Her fingers flew across the screen. Every board member who'd encouraged this relationship, every business contact Williams had introduced her to, every shell company, every suspicious transaction, every thread that led back to the Dimitrov syndicate. She found them all. And then, standing in her wedding dress with money falling around her like blood-soaked snow and a Mafia boss watching with approval, Chidera Johnson burned it all down. "Transfer initiated," she said softly. "Every asset connected to the conspiracy is now frozen. Every account linked to the Dimitrov syndicate is being drained and redistributed to law enforcement agencies across 3 continents. In approximately 90 seconds, everyone who tried to make me a victim will find themselves very, very poor." Young Jin's smile widened. "Impressive." Williams lunged for her, and his mask finally shattering completely. "You bitch! Do you know what you've just—" He didn't finish. Young Jin moved like lightning wrapped in silk, his tattooed hand catching Williams' wrist mid-reach and twisting until something cracked. William screamed, dropping to his knees. "You don't touch her," Young Jin said, his voice quiet and absolutely lethal. "You don't speak to her. You don't breathe in her direction. Are we clear?" Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. Good. Let them come. Let them see. Let the whole world witness what happened when you tried to destroy Chidera Johnson. She looked down at Williams, writhing on the marble floor of the cathedral where she was supposed to have married him, where she was supposed to have trusted him with her life, her heart, her future. "You made one mistake," she said quietly. "You thought I needed to be saved." Young Jin extended his hand to her, just as he had in that moment frozen in the reference photo. Not romantic, not gentle, a transaction, an offer, a door opening in a room she'd thought had only walls. "Walk out of here with me, Ms. Johnson, and I guarantee no one will ever underestimate you again." Chidera looked at his hand, at the tattoos that marked him as dangerous, at the certainty in his eyes that said he'd burn the world to protect his assets. And she was an asset now, protected, claimed, valued for exactly what she was, powerful. She reached out and took his hand. The cathedral doors stood open behind them. The money had stopped falling. Williams was being hauled to his feet by Young Jin's men, while police cars screeched to a halt outside. And Chidera Johnson walked down the aisle, not toward a husband, but toward something far more dangerous and infinitely more honest. Welcome to Ruthless Romance Tales. And honey, you just entered a world where wedding vows become warfare, and tech queens don't wait for rescue. They burn their enemies to the ground in real time. If you've been rolling with me, you know we don't do safe stories here. We do dangerous. We do obsessive. We do the kind of betrayal that rewrites your whole existence and the kind of alliance that scares the devil himself. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going because Chidera Johnson just put her hand in the devil's palm, and Young Jin, he doesn't do refunds. The memory came to her in fragments as Young Jin's hand closed around hers, warm, solid. Nothing like the cold transaction she'd expected. It pulled her back 6 months to a different kind of hand, a different kind of promise. Dubai, the Global Tech Summit. Chidera had been the keynote speaker, and she'd killed it. Standing ovation. 3 acquisition offers before she'd even left the stage. She remembered the adrenaline, the validation, the feeling of finally being seen for her brilliance instead of being reduced to think pieces about diversity in tech that treated her success like a social experiment rather than earned dominance. She'd been at the hotel bar still riding the high when he'd appeared beside her. "You didn't mention the part about the algorithm running on recursive neural pathways," he'd said. No introduction, just jumping into the technical deep end like he belonged there. That's the real innovation, isn't it? Not the encryption itself, but how it learns from attempted breaches. She'd turned to look at him and felt something shift in her chest. He was beautiful in that classic, almost cinematic way, the kind of handsome that belonged on magazine covers, warm brown eyes, perfect smile, a suit that said successful but not ostentatious. Everything about him screamed safe, appropriate, right for someone like her. "Most people don't catch that," she'd said, intrigued despite herself. She was used to men at these conferences who either wanted to mansplain her own technology to her or pitch themselves as potential co-founders for companies they had no business touching. "I'm not most people." He'd extended his hand. "Williams Hayes, on investment analyst, tech sector. And I have to say, Ms. Johnson, that was the most impressive presentation I've seen in 15 years of attending these summits." The way he'd said her name, Ms. Johnson, not Chidera, not immediately presuming intimacy, had made her respect him. Professional, respectful. Everything her mother had told her to look for in a man who could handle a woman of her caliber. They'd talked for 3 hours about neural networks and market valuations, and the loneliness of being the only one in the room who understood both the code and the capitalism. He'd listened like her words were scripture, made her laugh with observations about the pompous keynote speaker who'd gone before her, never once looked at his phone. When he'd asked for her number, she'd given it without hesitation. The courtship had been perfect. Oh, too perfect, she realized now, as Young Jin led her down the cathedral steps, her white gown trailing behind her like a ghost of the woman she'd almost become. Williams had known exactly what she needed to hear, exactly when she needed to hear it. "You're brilliant, Chidera. Not brilliant for a woman. Not brilliant despite your background. Just brilliant. Full stop. I don't care about your money. I care about the mind that built the empire. You deserve someone who sees you, not just your success." Every word had been a key, precisely cut to unlock the defenses she'd built over 32 years of being exceptional in rooms that didn't want her to be. He'd studied her. She understood now. Researched her interviews, her public appearances. The carefully curated social media presence that showed the tech empress but hid the lonely woman underneath. Their third date, he'd taken her to a hole-in-the-wall Nigerian restaurant in Brooklyn. "I know you grew up in Lagos," he'd said. "I thought you might be homesick." The jollof rice had tasted like her grandmother's kitchen, and she'd cried right there at the table, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness, the seeing of it. He'd held her hand across the checkered tablecloth and said, "I'm going to marry you, Chidera Johnson. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel invisible again." She'd believed him. God, she'd believed him. The proposal had come on a beach in Santorini at sunset because of course it had. Down on one knee, the ring he'd somehow known she'd love. Emerald-cut diamond, simple, elegant. Oh, nothing ostentatious because she hated flash. The words he'd said still echoed in her memory like a recording on loop. "You're enough, Chidera. You've always been enough. Will you let me spend my life proving that to you?" Every moment had been calculated. Every touch, every word, every perfectly timed gesture of affection designed to make her feel chosen, special, enough. He'd found the crack in her armor, the successful woman who'd built everything except a life partner, and he'd filled it with exactly the right lies. Young Jin's voice cut through her reverie. "You're thinking about how he did it." They were outside now, the cool evening air hitting her exposed shoulders. His men had formed a perimeter around them, a wall of black suits between her and the chaos still erupting in the cathedral. She could hear Williams screaming her name, and her mother's shocked sobs, the sirens getting closer. "Yes," she said simply. "He made you feel seen." Young Jin's hand was still wrapped around hers, warm and solid. He guided her toward a black SUV, one of 3 identical vehicles idling at the curb. "It's the oldest con in the book, Ms. Johnson. Find what someone desperately wants, become the only source of it, then extract the price." "You sound like you speak from experience." His smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'm in a business that trades in wants and needs. The difference is I'm honest about the transaction." He opened the SUV door for her. "Get in. We need to move before the police start asking questions I'd rather not answer in public." Chidera hesitated, one gloved hand on the doorframe. Behind her, the cathedral glowed with warm light, the place where she'd almost signed her own death warrant. Ahead, a strange vehicle with a dangerous man and an uncertain future. "Why did you really come?" she asked. "The truth, not the asset protection speech." Young Jin's expression shifted, something almost like respect crossing his tattooed features. "Because the Dimitrov syndicate killed my sister 3 years ago. Same method, different target. She married a man who made her feel safe, and he drowned her in a bathtub on their honeymoon." His voice went cold, flat. "When I found out they were running the same play on you, I decided enough was enough. Call it professional courtesy between people who've been hunted." Chidera's breath caught. This wasn't just about her company's encryption. This was personal, wrapped in the language of business, delivered with the precision of a man who'd learned to hide his humanity behind transactions. She got in the SUV. Young Jin slid in beside her, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb just as police cars screeched into the church parking lot. Through the tinted windows, she watched her wedding venue disappear, taking with it the last remnants of the life she'd almost lived. "The ledger you showed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "How much of it was real?" "All of it." He pulled out his phone, swiped through screens, then handed it to her. "William Hayes, also known as Michael Bennett, Christopher Wade, James Morrison, and 6 other aliases. He's been running inheritance scams for the Dimitrov syndicate for 8 years. You would have been victim number 12. The screen showed a file that made her stomach turn. Photos of women, all successful, all powerful in their own right. All dead. Car accidents, drownings. One tragic fall from a hotel balcony, each one ruled accidental, each one occurring within weeks of marrying their perfect, attentive partners. The pattern only became visible when you track the money, Young Jin continued, his voice clinical, detached. The Dimitrov syndicate targets women with liquid assets and minimal family oversight. Women who've built empires alone and desperately want partnership. They study you for months, sometimes years, find the perfect actor to play your ideal partner. Then they drain your accounts, stage your death, and disappear before anyone connects the dots. Chidera's hand shook as she scrolled through the files. These women could have been her sisters. Brilliant, driven, lonely in the way that came from being extraordinary. Each one had believed they'd found someone who saw them. Each one had been catastrophically wrong. How much was he supposed to get? The question came out barely a whisper. For you? $50 million. Your company's worth $300 million, but the terms of your corporate structure mean your death would trigger a mandatory sell-off. The Dimitrov syndicate had buyers lined up. They'd have acquired your life's work for pennies on the dollar, stripped it for parts, and walked away with enough to fund their operations for the next decade. The number hit her like a physical blow. Her entire existence, her brilliance, her years of sleepless nights building something extraordinary, reduced to a line item in a criminal syndicate's ledger, like the $500,000 at the church, she said slowly, pieces clicking together. That was just the down payment. For the marriage and the first 30 days of convincing performance, he'd have gotten the rest after your funeral. Young Jin took his phone back, his expression unreadable. The Bali honeymoon was scheduled for next week. Beautiful resort, private villa, infinity pool overlooking the ocean. Very romantic, also very easy to stage a drowning. Chidera's mind raced through every detail of the honeymoon planning. Williams had insisted on Bali, even though she'd wanted the Maldives. He'd chosen the resort, the villa, everything. She'd thought it was sweet, him taking charge of the romantic details while she handled the company's Q3 projections. He'd been planning her murder. And the SUV turned down a tree-lined street in what looked like Brooklyn Heights. Elegant brownstones, quiet money, the kind of neighborhood that minded its own business. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe while we figure out what to do with you." "Do with me?" The phrasing snapped her back to alertness, the shock beginning to burn off into something sharper. "I'm not a problem to be solved." "No," Young Jin agreed. "You're an asset to be protected and a weapon to be aimed. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize the difference." The vehicle stopped in front of a brownstone that looked like every other on the block. Perfect camouflage. Young Jin's men exited first, scanning the street with the precision of soldiers clearing hostile territory. Then Young Jin himself stepped out and offered his hand to help her from the SUV. Chidera ignored the hand and climbed out herself, her cathedral train dragging across the sidewalk. She stood there in her wedding gown, tiara still somehow attached to her veil, looking utterly ridiculous and not caring at all. "I want to see the rest of the file," she said. "Everything you have on Williams, on the Dimitrov syndicate, on the people who thought they could turn me into a statistic." Young Jin's smile was pure predatory appreciation. "Now you're thinking like someone who survives." He led her inside, through a door that looked normal but she noticed required 3 different biometric scans to open. The interior was nothing like the traditional brownstone exterior suggested, all modern angles, minimalist furniture, with technology embedded in every surface. A safe house designed by someone who understood that survival required both invisibility and absolute control. "Sit," Young Jin said, gesturing to a leather sofa that probably cost more than most people's cars. "I'll get the full briefing." But Chidera remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her white gown, her mind already 3 steps ahead. "You said the Dimitrov syndicate had buyers lined up for my company." "Yes. Give me their names." Young Jin paused in the doorway, turned to look at her with new interest. "Why?" "Because I'm going to make sure they never buy another company again. I'm going to make sure every person who touched this conspiracy wishes they'd never heard my name." Her voice was ice over steel. "You wanted to protect your asset, Mr. Young Jin. Fine. I consider me protected. Now let me show you what happens when your asset decides to become an active participant in the war you just dragged her into." The silence stretched between them, heavy with assessment. Then Young Jin laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuinely amused. "I was right about you," he said. "You're going to be magnificent." He disappeared into another room, leaving Chidera alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that her life had just pivoted on an axis she hadn't known existed. The woman who'd walked into that cathedral this morning was gone. In her place stood someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. Someone who'd learned that being chosen meant nothing if you weren't strong enough to choose yourself. Young Jin returned with a tablet and a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 glasses without asking, handed her one, then settled into the chair across from her with the ease of a man utterly comfortable in his power. "The Dimitrov Syndicate operates out of Brighton Beach," he began, pulling up files on the tablet. "They're old-school Russian mob, 3rd generation trying to modernize their operations. That's where you came in. Your encryption technology would have given them a significant advantage in their operations. It would have also crippled my organization's communications, which is why I've been paying very close attention to your company for the past year. You've been watching me." Not a question. "I've been watching your technology. You were just the brilliant architect." He turned the tablet toward her. "The syndicate's current leadership. Dmitry Volkov, Anton Petrov, and your maid of honor's boyfriend, Sergei Kozlov." The room tilted. "What did you just say?" "Your maid of honor, Jessica Martinez, her boyfriend of 8 months, the import-export businessman she's been posting all over social media. That's Sergei Kozlov, Dmitry Volkov's nephew, and the syndicate's primary talent scout." The whiskey glass trembled in Chidera's hand. Jessica, her best friend since their sophomore year at MIT, the woman who'd held her hand through her first board meeting, her mother's cancer scare, every triumph and disaster of adult life. "Jessica introduced you to Williams at that summit in Dubai," Young Jin continued, his voice relentless. "She made sure you were alone at the bar, made sure he had the perfect opening. She's been the inside track on this entire operation, feeding them information about your company, your habits, your vulnerabilities." "No." The word came out strangled. "Jessica wouldn't. She's been paid $200,000 over the past 6 months. He swiped to another file, bank records scrolling across the screen. "Small deposits, nothing that would trigger attention, all from shell companies connected to the Dimitrov Syndicate. She was your Judas, Ms. Johnson, and she sold you for significantly less than 30 pieces of silver." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow, doubling the wound Williams had already inflicted. It was one thing to be conned by a stranger playing a part. It was another entirely to discover that your chosen sister had been the one holding the door open for the wolves. "Where is she?" Chidera's voice came out flat, empty. "Still at the cathedral, probably being questioned by police along with everyone else. She'll play the shocked best friend perfectly. She's had months of practice." Chidera drained her whiskey in one burning swallow, then held out the glass for more. Young Jin poured without comment, watching her with those sharp, assessing eyes. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About Jessica?" 3 weeks. I was trying to figure out the best way to handle it when Williams moved up the wedding date. That forced my hand. He moved up the date because I told Jessica I was having doubts. The realization crashed over her. I told her I thought Williams might be too good to be true. She convinced me I was self-sabotaging again, that I should stop overthinking and just embrace happiness. She was accelerating the timeline before you could figure it out on your own. You're too smart, Ms. Johnson." They knew they were on borrowed time. Chidera stood abruptly, began pacing the length of the room, her white gown trailing behind her like a ghost, haunting its own funeral. Her mind worked through the implications, the cascade of betrayals, the meticulous planning that had gone into destroying her. "The vendor who handled my wedding flowers," she said suddenly. "Jessica recommended her. Owned by Sergei Kozlov. The photographer. His cousin. The venue. The cathedral. That beautiful historic cathedral she'd loved on sight. The diocese owes the Dimitrov Syndicate several favors related to their money laundering operations. They made sure you could book it on short notice." Young Jin's voice held a grim satisfaction at her rapid processing. They controlled every aspect of your wedding, Ms. Johnson. Every witness, every detail, all designed to make your death look like a tragic accident that happened shortly after the happiest day of your life. Chidera stopped pacing, turned to face him. You keep calling me Ms. Johnson. That's your name. You could call me Chidera. We're supposedly allies now. We're not allies. His expression remained impassive. We're business partners with aligned interests. Allies implies trust, friendship, emotional investment. We have a transaction. I protect you and your company. You continue to provide the encryption service my organization requires, and together we dismantle the Dimitrov syndicate before they try this again with someone else. How very romantic, she said dryly. Romance nearly got you killed. He set down his glass with deliberate precision. Yet I'm offering you something far more valuable. Honesty about what this is and what it isn't. Chidera studied him. This dangerous man with his tattooed hands and sharp suit, his complete lack of pretense about what he wanted from her. After 6 months of perfectly calibrated lies, the brutal transparency was almost refreshing. Fine, she said, business partners, but I want full access to everything you know about the Dimitrov syndicate, every operation, every associate, every dirty secret, and I want a seat at the table when we take them down. Revenge is expensive, Ms. Johnson, emotionally, financially, and sometimes mortally. Are you sure you want this? She thought about William's hands on hers at the altar, planning her death even as he smiled into her eyes. Thought about Jessica helping her into the wedding gown, or zipping it up while knowing it might as well be a shroud. Thought about all those other women in the files, brilliant and accomplished and dead because they dared to want love alongside their success. I don't want revenge, Chidera said quietly. I want justice. And I want to make absolutely certain no one else ends up in a file like the ones you showed me. So yes, I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Young Jin smiled, slow and deadly. Then we have an accord. He stood, extended his hand formally. Welcome to the war, Ms. Johnson. I think you're going to excel at it. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, the absolute certainty of a man who'd spent his life surviving in spaces that killed the unprepared. One more thing, she said, not releasing his hand. If you ever lie to me, if you ever manipulate me the way Williams did, I will burn your entire organization to ash and salt the earth where it stood. Are we clear? His smile widened. Perfectly. I wouldn't expect anything less. They stood there in the elegant safe house, an unlikely partnership forged in the wreckage of her wedding day, and Chidera felt something shift in her chest. Not trust. Young Jin was right. That would take time if it ever came at all. But recognition. She saw him clearly, and he saw her clearly, and in that mutual transparency was a kind of safety she hadn't known existed, the kind you built yourself, with your eyes wide open and your defenses sharp. Now, Young Jin said, releasing her hand and returning to his chair. Let's talk about how we're going to destroy the people who tried to destroy you. I believe you mentioned bankrupting them in real time at the cathedral? Chidera's smile was cold enough to frost the windows. That was just the opening move. Wait until you see what I do when I'm actually trying. Chidera's phone vibrated against the leather sofa, shattering the war room atmosphere. She glanced at the screen. 17 missed calls from her mother, 43 text messages, and 1 voice message from Jessica. Her finger hovered over the delete button, but Young Jin noticed. Listen to it, he said. Know your enemy's next move. She pressed play, raising the phone to her ear. Jessica's voice poured out thick with manufactured tears. Chidera, oh my God, where are you? Are you okay? That man, that psycho who crashed your wedding, the police are looking for you. Everyone's terrified. Your mom is losing her mind. Please, Please call me back. I'm so worried about you. Williams is trying to explain everything, saying that man was lying, that he's a criminal trying to extort you. Baby, come back to the church. We'll fix this together, I promise. I love you. The message ended. Chidera slowly lowered the phone, her expression carved from ice. She's still playing the part, Young Jin observed, probably hoping you'll surface so they can pivot to plan B. If they can't get you to marry Williams, they'll try another angle, maybe convince you he's the victim, that I'm the real threat. She called me baby. Chidera's voice was hollow. She only does that when I'm upset. When my company almost went under during the Series B, when my father died. She knows exactly which strings to pull. 8 years of friendship gives her a detailed blueprint of your vulnerabilities. Young Jin pulled up another file. She's been with Sergei Kozlov for 8 months, but their relationship started as a professional arrangement. She was recruited specifically to access you. The romantic element came later. Apparently, Sergei actually fell for her, which is the only sloppy element in their entire operation. Love makes people reckless, Chidera said bitterly. It does. Young Jin's eyes met hers, which is why I don't traffic in it. Simpler that way. Before she could respond, Young Jin's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression sharpening. We have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind with guns. He stood swiftly, pressing his earpiece. How many? A pause. The church? Now? Another pause. Then his jaw tightened. Get everyone out. I don't care about witnesses. No civilian casualties. He turned to Chidera. The Dimitrov syndicate just sent a cleanup crew to the cathedral. 12 armed men. They're not there to negotiate. Chidera's blood ran cold. My mother is still there. My family, the guests. Which is why they chose now while everyone's gathered and confused. They're planning to stage a mass shooting, blame it on me and my criminal organization, and eliminate every witness who heard the truth about Williams in one move. Young Jin was already moving toward a weapons cabinet concealed in the wall. It's a scorched earth tactic. If they can't have your assets, they'll make sure the exposure doesn't destroy their operation. We have to stop them. Chidera stood, on her mind already racing through scenarios, outcomes, probabilities. How far is the church from here? 12 minutes by car, 8 if we ignore traffic laws. Young Jin pulled out 2 handguns, checking the chambers with practiced efficiency. But my people are already there. 4 men in the building, 2 outside. Against 12 enforcers, those aren't favorable odds. Then we even them. Chidera reached for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I still have access to the church's security system. Jessica convinced me to upgrade it as a wedding gift to the parish. I can lock down sections, control the lights, feed you camera coverage. Young Jin paused, reassessing her. You can do that from here? I can do that from anywhere with an internet connection. I built a security company before I sold it to fund my current venture. She was already hacking into the system, her screen filling with code. The question is whether your people can hold out long enough for the police to arrive. The police are already there, confused and taking statements. The enforcers will kill them first to eliminate immediate resistance. Young Jin pressed his earpiece again. Marco, Ms. Johnson is about to give you an advantage. When the lights go out, move to the vestry. She'll guide you. He looked at Chidera. Can you do that? Watch me. Her fingers danced across the screen, accessing camera feeds, override protocols, emergency systems that should have required administrative passwords, but bent to her will like digital clay. I've got eyes on 12 hostiles entering through the main entrance. They're dressed as private security, smart. The real police won't realize until it's too late. Where are my men? 2 in the nave near the altar, 1 in the balcony, 1 in the sacristy. She highlighted their positions on a digital map. The enforcers are splitting up, 6 going for the main sanctuary where the guests are, 6 heading toward the back offices where Williams is being held for questioning. They're going to kill Williams too. Young Jin's voice held a grim satisfaction. He's a liability now that the truth is exposed. The Dimitrov syndicate doesn't leave loose ends. Chidera felt nothing at the revelation. The man she'd loved, or thought she'd loved, was about to be executed by the same organization that had paid him to kill her. There should have been something. Pity, vindication, grief. But there was only cold calculation, her mind focused on the tactical problem in front of her. "Lights out in 3, she said. 2, 1. She pressed enter, and every light in the cathedral died. Through the phone connection to Young Jin's men, she heard the screams, the confusion, the sharp-barked orders in Russian as the enforcers tried to adapt to sudden darkness. Chidera switched to thermal imaging on the security cameras, tracking heat signatures through the building. "Your man in the balcony, Marco, he's got 3 targets approaching from the west corridor. Tell him to move north behind the organ." Her voice was steady, clinical. "There's a service exit there that leads to the bell tower. He can pick them off from elevation." Young Jin relayed the information, his tone sharp and commanding. Through the earpiece, Chidera heard gunfire, short, controlled bursts that sounded nothing like the movies, more like fireworks, sharp cracks that echoed through the cathedral's stone walls. "The guests are panicking," she said, watching the thermal cameras show 200 people stampeding toward the exits. "Your men near the altar need to get them out. The enforcers are using the chaos to get closer." "East exit," Young Jin commanded into his phone. "Herd them east. That's away from the main assault." More gunfire. Chidera watched a heat signature drop in the north corridor. One of Young Jin's men or one of the enforcers, she couldn't tell. Her heart hammered against her ribs, adrenaline sharpening every sense. "4 enforcers just reached the offices where Williams is," she reported. "Wang and the police officers guarding him are outgunned." "Can you seal that section?" Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "The fire doors can be electromagnetically locked. Give me 10 seconds." She bypassed 3 security protocols, overrode the fire marshal's manual controls, and triggered the lockdown. Sealed. They're trapped in there with Williams and 2 very confused police officers. The officers will call for backup. Already done. Chidera had simultaneously sent an anonymous tip to 911 reporting shots fired at the cathedral, complete with GPS coordinates and a description of the assault vehicles outside. SWAT should be here in under 5 minutes. Young Jin's expression shifted into something that might have been admiration. "You're weaponizing bureaucracy." "I'm weaponizing everything I have." She watched another heat signature fall, then another. The cathedral was turning into a war zone, and she was conducting it from a leather sofa in a Brooklyn safe house, wearing a wedding dress. "Your man in the sacristy is pinned down. 2 enforcers have him cornered. Can you help him?" Chidera scanned the cathedral's systems, her mind racing through options. Then she saw it. The old bell system, manually operated but connected to an electric motor installed in the 1970s. "Tell him to cover his ears." She triggered the bell motor, and the cathedral's massive bronze bells erupted into sound. Through the phone connection, she heard the cacophony even filtered through Young Jin's earpiece, a deafening, disorienting assault that would make tactical thinking nearly impossible. The 2 enforcers near the sacristy staggered, clutching their heads. Young Jin's man moved, his heat signature shifting with predatory precision. 2 shots. Both enforcers dropped. "Marco reports 4 targets down," Young Jin said, listening to his earpiece. 8 still active. 6, Chidera corrected. 2 more just dropped in the west corridor. I don't think those were your people. Young Jin's eyes narrowed. The police are engaging. This is about to get very messy. Through the security cameras, Chidera watched the tactical situation deteriorate into chaos. The enforcers, realizing they'd lost the element of surprise, were trying to fight their way out. The police, outgunned but entrenched, were holding the main exits. Young Jin's men were somewhere in the middle, and 200 terrified civilians were still trying to escape. "We need to end this," Chidera said, "before someone innocent dies." "Suggestions?" She pulled up the cathedral's sprinkler system. "The enforcers are using infrared sights to navigate the darkness. Water will scatter the infrared signature, make targeting nearly impossible." Her finger hovered over the activation button. "It'll also ruin about $2 million worth of historic artwork and probably get me sued by the archdiocese." "Do it!" She triggered the sprinklers. Every fire suppression system in the cathedral activated simultaneously, drenching the building in a deluge of water. The heat signatures on her thermal cameras immediately became confused, scattered, useless. "Your men need to switch to night vision." Not thermal," she said. Young Jin was already relaying the command. Through the earpiece, she heard his people adapting, moving through the darkened, flooding cathedral with the precision of men who'd trained for exactly this kind of chaos. The enforcers weren't as prepared. Chidera watched them cluster together, trying to retreat to their vehicles, now fighting blind against enemies who could see them perfectly. It was over in 90 seconds. The SWAT team arrived just as the last enforcers were attempting to flee, finding themselves trapped between Young Jin's men and heavily armed police. The arrests were swift, professional, and incredibly violent. Chidera monitored it all from her screen, her white gown soaking up spilled whiskey from where she'd knocked over her glass during the chaos. And when the last heat signature was either down or in custody, she finally exhaled, her hands shaking as the adrenaline drained away. "Your people?" she asked quietly. Young Jin listened to his earpiece. "2 wounded, nothing critical. Marco took a shot to the shoulder, but he's walking out." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You just orchestrated a tactical defense of a civilian structure using nothing but a phone and a security degree. I'm impressed." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "People almost died because of me, because I was stupid enough to fall for—" "People almost died because the Dimitrov syndicate decided your life was worth less than their profit margin," Young Jin interrupted sharply. "Don't take their guilt onto yourself. That's what they want, for you to feel responsible for their choices." He was right. Oui, but it didn't stop the shaking in her hands or the nausea rising in her throat. She'd just watched people, bad people, yes, but still people, die through thermal cameras while sitting in a safe house wearing her wedding dress. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now the police have 12 Dimitrov syndicate enforcers in custody, all of whom will lawyer up immediately and say nothing. Williams is alive and will likely claim he was a victim too. Jessica will play the shocked best friend. And you," Young Jin paused, "you need to decide what story you're going to tell. The truth. The truth is complicated. You were rescued by a known organized crime figure. You're currently in my safe house. You just hacked a cathedral's security system to facilitate a gunfight. The optics aren't great, Ms. Johnson." Chidera stood, her wet dress clinging to her legs, and faced him squarely. "I don't care about optics. I care about destroying the people who tried to kill me. If that means admitting I got help from you, fine. If it means exposing my own stupidity in trusting Williams, fine. I'm done hiding." Admirable. Possibly suicidal from a legal standpoint, but admirable. Young Jin checked his phone. "My lawyer is already en route to the cathedral to represent my men. I can have her represent you, too, if you want. She's very good at making complicated situations look like self-defense." "I have my own lawyers, a whole firm of them." Chidera pulled out her phone, began scrolling through contacts. "But thank you." She paused on Jessica's name in her contact list. 8 years of friendship condensed into a phone number and a profile picture of them laughing at a tech conference. Evidence of a life built on lies. "I want to confront her," Chidera said quietly, "before she disappears into witness protection or whatever deal she cuts with the prosecutors." "Bad idea. Emotional confrontations rarely end well." "I don't care." She looked up at Young Jin, her expression hard. "She was my best friend. She stood in my wedding party knowing I was going to die. I need to look her in the eye and ask her why. I need that closure." Young Jin studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we'll get it for you. But not tonight. Tonight you need to survive the police questions, the media circus, and the inevitable fallout of a very public catastrophe. Tomorrow, when things are calmer, but we'll arrange a meeting with Jessica. Controlled environment, my people present, complete safety." "Promise?" "I don't make promises, Ms. Johnson. I make guarantees. And I guarantee you'll get your confrontation." He extended his hand to help her up. "Now let's get you cleaned up and prepared to face the aftermath of your wedding day from hell." Chidera took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. The wedding dress was ruined, water-stained, ripped at the hem, spotted with whiskey and the debris of a destroyed fairy tale. She looked like a bride who'd crawled out of her own grave. Maybe that's exactly what she was. "One more thing," she said as they headed toward the door. "When we take down the Dimitrov syndicate, and we will take them down, I want Jessica to know it was me. And I want her to understand exactly what it costs to betray someone who trusted you." Young Jin's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Now you're thinking like someone who wins." They left the safe house together, stepping into the cool night air. The streets of Brooklyn Heights were quiet, oblivious to the war that had just been waged a few miles away. Young Jin's remaining men formed a protective perimeter as they walked to a fresh SUV, this one unconnected to the events at the cathedral. Chidera climbed in, her ruined dress bunching around her legs, and looked back at the safe house. 12 hours ago, she'd woken up excited for her wedding day. Now she was climbing into a vehicle with a Mafia boss, planning the systematic destruction of a criminal syndicate. Her entire life atomized into before and after this moment. "Are you ready?" Young Jin asked from beside her. She thought about William's lies, Jessica's betrayal, the women in those files who died believing in love. She thought about her company, her life's work, nearly stolen by people who saw her only as a bank account. She thought about her mother's tears, her guests' horror, the spectacular public humiliation of having her wedding violently interrupted. And beneath all of it, she felt something new crystallizing in her chest. Not revenge. That was too hot, too emotional. This was colder, more permanent. Justice, yes, but also transformation. The death of the woman who desperately wanted to be chosen, and the birth of someone who chose herself. "I'm ready," Chidera said, her voice steady as stone. "Let's go destroy them." The SUV pulled away from the curb, carrying her toward the cathedral, the police, the media, and the wreckage of her old life. In the side mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself. Veil torn, makeup smeared, dress destroyed, eyes hard as diamonds. She looked like a warrior queen dressed in a bride's costume. She looked like someone who'd learned the most important lesson: you don't need to be saved. You need to be so dangerous that salvation becomes irrelevant. The cathedral came into view, still lit by police lights, surrounded by news vans and gawking crowds. Chidera Johnson, tech empress and almost victim, stepped out of the SUV in her ruined wedding gown, holding her head high. Behind her, Young Jin followed, his tattooed hands visible, his presence a clear statement. She was protected, she was dangerous, and anyone who thought her weak had catastrophically miscalculated. Together, they walked toward the chaos, toward the questions, toward the beginning of a war that would end with the Dimitrov syndicate's complete annihilation. and Chidera smiled, cold and certain, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't the prize. She was the player,